Hi, I'm Dennis Phillips, and welcome to Everyday Reloading and Shooting. In this video, I'll be showing you my reloading process for 223 ammo from start to finish. There are different ways to clean the brass, different ways to anneal the brass, but what I'll be showing you here is my process and how I do it. Let's say that you've just come home from the range, you've managed to pick up some brass that you plan to reload. If that's an outdoor range and that brass has been lying in the dirt, first you want to put that in a pan with some soapy water and clean that brass off to remove that loose dirt. After you've washed it, you can lay it on a towel and lay it out in the sun to dry, or you can put it on a cookie sheet in your oven at about 200 degrees for about an hour, and that should get it nice and dry for you. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take that semi-cleaned brass and we're going to anneal it. Now, there are different ways to anneal. You can use an induction annealer or torch annealer. You can spend a lot of money on annealing, but what I'm using is a plumber's torch here. This is a propane canister with a torch on the end, and what we're going to do is we're going to heat just the neck and shoulder of this brass, not until it turns red, but just before it turns red. And in order to do that, we're going to put it in an electric drill, which I have here. And for 223 brass, I'm using a 3/8 socket. You'll put that on the flame and spin it until that neck almost starts to turn red, and then you're going to stop it. Well, I'll show you that here in a second, but why do we anneal brass? We anneal the brass because what that does is that softens the material, because we're going to be working with this brass. We're going to be pushing that shoulder back, and we're going to be squeezing that neck diameter back down to its original factory specification. And what happens when you do that repeatedly, that work hardens that brass. And what work hardening does is it causes that brass to become brittle. So, for example, if you were to take this piece of brass and clamp down on it with a pair of pliers on each end and start bending that back and forth, it might take you 10, 15, maybe 20 times, but eventually that brass is going to break because it becomes work hardened and it becomes brittle. Well, the same thing happens when you fire that brass in your rifle. That brass expands to fill the chamber of your rifle. The neck diameter increases. And then what you do when you reload it, you put it in a press and you compress it back down to its original size that it was when it came from the factory. And so that process of expanding, compressing, expanding, compressing, that has the same effect as if you had that pair of pliers on there and was twisting that brass back and forth. Eventually, it's going to fail. What will happen is you will get a split case neck going right down here, and then that brass will be basically unusable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the lights, and I'm going to turn on this torch, and then I'm going to show you the annealing process. So I'm going to go ahead and light this. Okay, there we go. You might not be able to see this from there, but you see there's a blue flame and then there's a blue inner flame. I'm going to turn that knob down to where that inner flame is about maybe 1 inch to 1.5 inches long. You want to do that to conserve your fuel. Now, this is propane. Propane comes in a blue cylinder. There's another type of gas called MAP gas, M-A-P-P, and that comes in typically a yellow cylinder. And it burns hotter than propane. So I have my drill, and I'm going to turn this, I'm going to rotate the cartridge in the drill, and I'm going to put it in the flame to where that inner blue flame is just touching the case shoulder and neck. And I'm going to count how long it takes for that particular piece to turn red. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 seconds it turned red. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and drop it in the pan. So you want to heat that until just before it turns red. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if it happens to turn red, that brass is still going to be usable. 2, 3, 4, 5. If you see it start to turn red, drop it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The main reason for annealing is that it extends the life of your brass. I know some people may only have a policy of maybe reloading a piece of brass maybe 4 or 5 times. I've had brass that I've reloaded probably 20 times. Eventually what will happen though is you'll have to discard some brass, because after so many firings that primer pocket will get loose and it will be easy for that primer to pop out. So once that primer pocket gets loose, that brass is no longer any good. At that point it's ready to be recycled. One of the things you'll notice when the brass is annealed is it changes color on the tip end of that brass. That way you know it's been annealed. So once you've done all your cases and you've annealed them at the shoulder and neck, you can then go on to the next step in the process, which is cleaning the brass. There are different ways to do that. I use a rotary tumbler with a dry media, and I'll show you that here in just a minute. So here's a better look at the brass after it's been annealed, and you can see how the neck and shoulder have changed color after being annealed, and that's what you want to see. So once the brass is annealed, now it's ready to be cleaned. I use the Frankfurt Arsenal rotary tumbler. This is supposedly a wet tumbler, but it can be used wet or dry because it's just a plastic canister with a lid and a seal. This ring screws on to secure that. Now we'll go place this on the motor. I keep this in another part of the house because it's kind of noisy. But there we go. And I typically let these run overnight. Gets them really clean. And the dry media gets inside of those cases, and that will loosen up and remove the carbon. I've just replaced this media because the other had gotten kind of dirty, and I put a piece of tape on it with a date on it, and so when this is probably maybe 3 months old, I'll probably toss it and replace it. But this will get those cases extremely bright and shiny. Also, if you add just about a spoonful of auto polish, I use Meguiar's, that will also give that brass a really nice feel when it comes out of there. All right. So the next step will be to remove the media, separate the media from the cases, and then the cases will be ready to be prepped. So these have been tumbling overnight, so they should be about done now. So let's get them. So let's take them and have a look. All right, let's see how these turned out. I have this little strainer here. And this will separate most of the media from the casings. Oh yeah. And these turned out beautifully. So there's still media inside of these cases, so we need to separate that out. So I have this Frankfurt Arsenal media separator for that purpose. It opens like so. We dump in the casings. Latch it. Put the cover on because it's kind of noisy. And then we run this back and forth a few times, maybe about a minute. And that should do it. And you can see how much media came out of the inside of those cases. And we'll just dump this back in over here. And we'll reuse that later. So there's our brass, all clean and polished and ready for prepping. After the brass has been annealed and tumbled clean, the next thing we want to do is resize it in our resizing die. And before we do that, we have to lubricate that brass so that it doesn't get stuck in the sizing die. We also want to lubricate the inside of the case mouth as well as the outside of the brass. So for that, I set these into the loading block like so. And I have this lanolin and alcohol mixture. It's a 9-to-1. And we put a little bit of that in a little cup. I take a Q-tip, get a little bit of that on the Q-tip, and then I come back and I place that inside the case mouth. So the inside of the case mouth gets lubricated because the expander ball is going to come up through the case mouth to expand it back out to the proper size once it's been sized and compressed down. So we want the case mouths to be lubricated. So I can dip the Q-tip and I can do about 10 of them. But we'll do this to all 50. There are different ways to lubricate. This is my preferred method. It's very inexpensive and it's also effective. So now we're going to take this. Here I have a sheet of Tyvek on a piece of cardboard. And I try to lay these out to where they all roll out horizontally. You'll need a tray to catch these in once this is done. But I'll spray this lanolin and alcohol mixture on the cases. I'll roll them a little bit, spray some more. Then I'll also spray here on the edge. And as I roll them off, I roll them through that lanolin alcohol mixture that's on the edge. Okay. When I'm done with that, I'll take a paper towel and I'll come back and I'll remove the excess. Otherwise, this tends to build up and it becomes sticky. And you want to keep that clean because you want to keep your brass clean. Okay. Before I start resizing these, I'm going to lay out a couple of towels. And I have a couple of pieces of just ordinary printer paper that I've taped together. I'll lay those down. That paper will help to absorb some of the alcohol off of the cases, but we need to let the alcohol evaporate, and then it will leave that thin coat of lanolin behind. I'm going to also wipe out the bin that I had those in, because that lube will get sticky if not. Looks like I've got the right shell holder in there already. Yep. I'm going to insert the decapping die and sizing die into the press. Before we do any sizing, we want to check our headspace. We may have to adjust the press. So I have the Hornady Lock and Load Headspace Comparator Kit. This bushing fits a 6.5 Creedmoor, so I need to swap that out for the correct one. This one fits 223. I've got it marked there so I can tell that. You want to seat that on your caliper and tighten that down. So we'll turn this on. We load a case into the headspace gauge, and then we zero that out. We size the case. We check again. And now we have 2 thousandths on our gauge. So that means it's set correctly, because you want 2 thousandths of clearance between the shoulder and the inside of the chamber. Otherwise, if you have too much, that's going to cause that case, when it's fired, to expand too much, and eventually you'll have a separation and that case will come apart. So 1.5 to 2 thousandths is about all you need. So we know that the die is set up correctly, so we can set this aside and we can proceed with sizing. So we insert the case into the shell holder, push down, it deprimes it and sizes the case. And after the cases are all sized, then we will need to clean the lube off of them. I mentioned about squeezing the neck size down when you size the case. If you were to take a bullet and slip it into the case, it's loose. It actually falls down inside of the case. But once we resize that, that squeezes the neck down, so the bullet has to be forced into the case neck, and then that will hold it securely. And that's part of the resizing process. After the cases have all been sized, they still have the lube on them and they're sticky, and you don't want that getting all over your hands while you handle them. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove the lube off of these cases. A couple of ways you could do that. You could put them back through the tumbler, either wet tumble or dry tumble them again. Of course, that lube is going to get onto your media, so you might want to have a separate media for removing case lube if you're going to tumble to do that. But what I like to do is I like to just lay these out in a row like you see here. Bear with me a second. And we line them up in a nice straight row. Or they don't have to all be turned the same direction. But then I have this window cleaner, and I'm going to spray each of these down, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to massage that onto the cases, and that's going to loosen that lubricant, lanolin. And then I'm going to roll them down about a quarter to a third of a turn. I'll spray them again. I'll come back and I'll do the same thing. I'm going to massage those cases to rub this cleaner onto that lubricant to loosen that up. Roll them down another third of a turn. Spray them again. Massage the cases. Roll them down another third or fourth of a turn. They've got plenty of cleaner on them by now, so I'm not going to spray them again, but I am going to massage the cases a little bit to make sure I get that off. Then I'm going to fold the towel over, and I'm going to push down, and I'm going to push from side to side as I rub those to use friction to help remove the cleaner and the lubricant. Then I'm going to take another towel, a clean towel. Probably doesn't look very clean, but you know what I mean. Lay them out here. This time I have a little bit of alcohol in a spray bottle. You probably don't need to do this step, but it helps because that lubricant dissolves in alcohol. So after we have annealed, cleaned, sized, deprimed cases and removed the case lube, the next step is to trim those. For that purpose, I have this drill press equipped with the World's Finest Trimmer 2, and I've got it adjusted. So we want to trim all of our cases to the proper length, which is 1.75 inches. As you can see, that one is correct. So we're going to trim all these, and then we'll come back and continue with our case prep. If your cases are all between 1.750 and 1.760, you'll be fine to reload those. But for consistency, it's best to have them all the same. You can feel it when it's cutting, and you can feel it when it stops. .750. All right, I'm going to finish these up, and then we'll come back and do some case prep. The case prep, the trimming process took a toll on our brass. As you can maybe see here, there's a better picture right here, but you can see how this rim on the case mouth is sharp and has an edge to it. We want to clean that up so that the bullet will seat properly, and also so that the round will chamber properly in your rifle. And then we also have to clean up the primer pocket as well. Now this is previously fired brass, which has been prepped, so we don't have to worry about crimp removal because that was already been done the last time this was loaded. So we're going to lay this out here. You see all that loose brass that's in there? That's from the trimming process. So we will deburr, camphor, clean the case mouth, clean the primer pocket. Deburr, camphor, clean the case mouth, clean the primer pocket. So now you can see that that's clean on the inside there. And that case mouth is also nice and clean. So we'll do this for all 50 rounds. Also, when you're working your brass, be on the lookout for things like this. There's a split in that case neck. That needs to go in the trash or a recycling bin. That round is no longer any good. And also, you see this ring, this shiny ring around the base of this case? That's an indication that this case is about to split. And if you want to verify that, you can take this little tool right here, which is a paper clip, which I put a little hook on the end, and you fit that inside of there, and you can actually feel, a little groove that goes around the inside of that cartridge all the way around. It hangs up right there. And you can feel that that case is about to split. So when you see that, just go ahead and discard it and get rid of it. You could probably fire it one more time, but it would likely split apart inside of your rifle, possibly cause a jam. Now, if this were brass that I just picked up off the range, we would go through another step here, and we would remove the crimp from the primer pocket. And that's what this tool is for. This tool mounts onto the case prep center, and you would use this tool to cut and remove that crimp from the primer pocket. But this has already been previously prepped, so we don't have to go through that step with this brass. So you see all of the brass here that was removed. That was just from the camphering and deburring. So that has to be removed, otherwise that ends up in your rifle chamber, and you don't want that. I'll use a shop vac to take care of that. You want to keep your work area free of any loose brass. You see how much brass was left over in that container? You want to clean that out as well. So after all of the cases have been sized, prepped, and the case lube has been removed, then I like to do something that I call the plunk test, where you take one of your sized cases, you drop it into the case gauge, and it makes a plunk sound like that. And it should fall in and fall right out. So you see how that case fits flush in the case gauge? If it doesn't fit flush, there's a good chance that round will not chamber in your rifle. So you want to make sure all of these cases fit flush in the case gauge. Drop it in, drop it out, drop it in, drop it out, drop it in, drop it out. Now that the cases are all cleaned and prepped, it's time to seat the primers. So I have the Frankfurt Arsenal handheld priming tool, and I believe this is already set up for 223. So I'm going to take these primers, dump them into the tray here. You shake it a little bit, and most of them will right themselves face up. And these are. So I'm going to reinsert the cover. Insert that into the priming tool. Then there's a little door right here that I'm going to open that allows the primers to drop into the tube. I'll need a loading block. So you insert the case, squeeze it, and you have a seated primer. Insert the case, squeeze it, it's primed. Sometimes if they seem to be a little sticky, you might have to give them a little bit of a twist to make sure they're going in straight. But that's all there is to it. With some priming tools, it's possible to have one flip upside down. So you want to check each one to make sure that they're seated fully and correctly. Then after these are primed, we can charge the cases with powder. If one should happen to feel really loose going in, you want to take something like this. I've taken a nail and I've ground down a little spike on the end, and you can fit that into the case, find the flash hole, and then try to press that out. If you can't press it out, then it's good to go. And these all seem to be good. I'm using CCI 450 Magnum primers. You always want to have this pointed away from your face. There's always the remote possibility of a primer going off. Okay, and I'm done with those. So the leftovers, I'm putting back into a little bullet case labeled CCI 450 Magnum primers. And that is it for priming. Okay, so our cases are all prepped and primed and ready to go, but there's one thing we have to do before we start dispensing powder and seating bullets. This is something that you could do at the onset of the loading process, and that's load development. We have to decide what bullet we're going to use, what powder, and what charges that we're going to use. Your reloading manual is going to provide data for your load development. So here we have pages for the various different bullet weights and the powders and the charge weights for those particular bullets. We're going to be reloading a 55 grain full metal jacket, and these are the various powders that can be used with that particular bullet. We're going to be reloading with CFE 223. Now, when you load, pay attention to these numbers in red over here on the far right, because that is your maximum charge weight, and you should never exceed that under any circumstance. So this is where you want to get your load data. You're probably going to have some friends or maybe people on any of the various reloading forums. They're going to tell you what they do and what rounds they've used, and some people will tell you that they've even exceeded these loads. Do not exceed these maximum loads under any circumstances, because you could face possible serious injury or maybe even death if you do that. So always stay within these charge weights, and it's a good idea to start low and work your way up and watch for pressure signs on your cases. If you start to see primers flattening out or ejector marks in your case head, that's an indication of overpressure, which means you need to back off of that load a little bit. Well, another way is when you've been to the range and you've already tested certain loads and you've come up with loads that group pretty well, you can go from there. So here I loaded from 24.8 to 27.4 grains of CFE 223 using a 55 grain full metal jacket bullet. The best groups that I had were at 26.1 and 26.7 grains of powder. Well, there's 0.6 of a grain difference between those two. So what I decided to do is, in this case, we're going to load at 26.1, 26.3, 26.5, 26.7, and 26.9. So we're going to start here at the 26.1, and we're going to do jumps in 0.2 of a grain increments. And on the 26.7, we're going to go over that to 26.9. So that's what we're going to be loading here. So since we've decided on our load development, I have put the primed and prepped cases into a loading block, and we're going to be loading 10 rounds of each. And so I've put a piece of yellow tape on the edge of the loading block, and I've labeled each row with the amount of the powder charge from 26.1 to 26.9, going in 2 grain steps, 0.1, 0.3, 0.5, 0.7, 0.9. And so the next thing that we'll need to do is dispense the powder. And so for that, we will be using Hornady CFE 223. I have the Hornady powder trickler funnel, and I've got this little jig set up with an old iPhone. All right, and we also have the RCBS Uniflow powder measure, and so we'll be using that and demonstrating how that works. And we will also show you how the beam scale is set up as well. The benefit of having this set up is that when you're looking at the scale, if you're looking at it from an angle, it's going to read differently than if you're looking at it straight on. So you always want to be at eye level when you're looking at the markings on the scale, when you're reading that. But what this does, this setup changes the three-dimensional object to a two-dimensional image, so that when this changes, you don't have to be bending over to see that at eye level, because you're seeing what the camera sees at eye level right there. So I wanted to take a minute to show you the operation of the beam scale. This is somewhat similar to a scale that you might see, or maybe in years past in a doctor's office, a mechanical scale where you have two weights. a large weight, and a smaller weight. And in this case, on this scale, that's exactly what we have here. We have a large weight and a smaller weight. And I'm going to set both of these on 0. On this side, the small marks are 5 grain increments. And maybe you can see here, it's currently on 0. And so if we wanted to increase the weight, we would go 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. And then to increase the weight over here, on the right side, the right side is divided up into 1 grain increments, and the smaller marks are 1/10 of a grain each. So we have from 0 to 5 on the right side, and then all the way up to 500 grains on the left side. But for this, we're going to be loading 26.1 grains of powder. So we're at 25 here. So we're going to come down to this side and we're going to go 1, and that makes 26. But the charge is going to be 26.1. So we move it 1 small mark over. So now we've got it at 26.1. Once we place our powder in the tray and set it on the scale, when that goes to 0, we'll know it's right. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to set the powder dispenser to where it'll throw a charge that's a little bit less than the final weight, and then we will use the powder trickler. We will place powder in here, and then when we turn the knob, you can see there's a hole in that rod, and it's a hollow rod. And as you turn the trickler, powder will travel down through that rod, and you can turn it the slightest amount just to trickle a little bit of powder into this tray to get it up to the proper charge weight. So I'm going to fill the dispenser with powder. And again, we're using Hodgdon CFE 223. And that should be more than enough for 50 rounds. All right, so we have powder in the powder trickler. The scale has been zeroed and set to 26.1. So we're going to drop a charge and weigh it. And it doesn't move the scale. So to increase the charge, we turn this knob to the right. To decrease it, you turn it to the left. So let's try again. This is a pretty fine ball powder too. Okay, now we're overweight. So I'm going to dump a little bit of that in here. And I'm going to back off here just slightly. Still heavy. Okay, and that moves the arm. It'll take a minute for this trickler for the tube to fill. I'll be able to see it when it starts to drop. Okay, and it's dropping, and the needle is moving. Okay, so I'm turning the trickler here, and that line is moving up on the middle marker. And there it is at 0. I take the charge, I put the funnel on the case mouth, I dump the charge, and I move the funnel to the next case. And then we repeat the process. If we can get this to where it weighs perfectly every time, we'll just dispense right into the cases. So I did get the powder measure adjusted to where it's dispensing consistently every time. So here's an example here. This is like 3 times in a row now. And maybe you can see the scale here. But that charge is right on 0. So I'm going to dispense these directly into the case. This powder charge I will drop. And I'm going to dispense these directly into the case, and then we'll measure the last one just to verify that we are in fact getting an accurate measure. So for the last, and again, it's right on 0. All right, we're ready to seat the bullets. So first we're going to remove the decapping and sizing die, and we're going to replace that with the bullet seating die. These are Bob's Bullets. You can find these at 223bulkbullets.com. These are like 11 cents a piece when you buy them in bulk like this. So I'm going to lay a few out on a towel. They're just a little easier to pick up, and they don't roll around quite as much. And I'm going to go ahead and turn these all pointed in the same direction. That way when I reach and pick one up, I don't have to fumble around with it turning it around. Okay, so there we go. If I happen to have missed one, I think we'll be okay. So to check our overall length, we'll be using a caliper. I'll go ahead and turn that on. And I'm going to take the first bullet or case. Okay, and that actually seated very well right below the cannelure, right on the cannelure. Let me check that length. And it's 2.231. So it's less than 2.25 and it's more than 2.20. And it's right in the middle of that cannelure. So we're going to go with that. So it's pretty simple. You insert the case into the shell holder, run the ram down, set the bullet right on top of the case mouth, pull the press, and voila, you have a new bullet. Now, if you're going to shoot these in a semi-automatic, as I mentioned, these need to be crimped. So I will show you how to do that. I'll be shooting these in a bolt action rifle, but we will go through that step and show you how the crimp is done. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and seat all these, and then I'll come back to you. All right, all of the seating is done. So we're going to remove the seating die and we're going to replace that with the crimp die. And this has already been adjusted. There will be instructions in your die set on how to adjust it. I've adjusted this for a light crimp. And it's a very small ring around the top of the case that you can barely see. So if you're shooting these through a semi-automatic, you definitely want to make sure all of these are crimped, because that's going to help with feeding in the rifle. It's going to help prevent jams, and it will also prevent the bullet from accidentally being pushed inside the case, also probably causing a jam. But there we go. The only thing left to do is package them up and take them to the range and shoot them. A couple of ways you can do that. You could do that with a plastic ammo box, or what I have used in the past is Ziploc baggies. You can label that with the load data, and you can reuse the baggies over and over. These have probably been used 20 or more times each. That's why they look so old. But I'm going to be taking these to the range. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these into the magazines. So what I'll do here is this load of 26.1. I'm going to remove that piece of tape. Now I'm going to label my magazine with it. 26.1. Then I'm going to take these 10 rounds and I've got 10 of these, so I could load up to 100 rounds. In this case, I've only got 50, but I'm going to do this with every one of these, so I'll be ready to go at the range. I won't have to spend any time reloading my magazine, and I'll be able to shoot nonstop, pretty much. So that's my process from start to finish. If you're new and just starting out in reloading, I hope you found this information to be helpful. If you've been at it for a while, maybe you've got a few ideas on how to improve the process or make things better. Maybe there's something else you would like to see in these videos. Please feel free to leave a comment below. I hope you will also like and share this video with others, and please remember to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.